The wind cut through the trees like a blade made of ice, and Nathan Cole almost missed her. He was riding fast, faster than he should have on a night like this, when his horse suddenly stopped and refused to move forward. Nathan cursed under his breath and looked ahead. That was when he saw it, a shape in the snow, pale, still, almost buried under drifting white. He jumped down before his mind caught up with his body. It was a woman. Her lips were blue. Her hands were curled tight against her chest, frozen in the shape of someone trying to stay warm long after warmth had left her. She wore a long white dress, torn at the sleeves, soaked through and stiff with frost. A wedding dress. Out here. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a storm that could kill a grown man in an hour. Nathan knelt beside her and pressed 2 fingers to her neck. A pulse, weak but there. He looked up at the dark shape of the mountains around him, and then down at the torn fabric near her shoulder. A small crest was stitched into the cloth, half hidden by blood and snow, but he knew it the moment his eyes found it. The Ashcombe family, his family's oldest enemy. The name alone had haunted every household in this valley for 20 years. Nathan's own father had died because of that name, burned alive in a house fire that everyone whispered was no accident. Nathan had been 12 years old when it happened, old enough to remember every detail, young enough that the memory never fully healed. He had grown up hating that crest, hating everything it stood for. And now here was a woman wearing it, dying in the snow in front of him. He should have left her there. Some cold part of his mind told him this clearly, calmly, the way a man tells himself the truth when no one else is listening. Nobody would ever know. The storm would finish what someone else had already started. He could ride home, warm his hands by the fire, and never think of this moment again. But her fingers twitched. It was such a small thing, just a small twitch of frozen fingers reaching toward nothing. But it broke something loose in his chest. Some old, stubborn piece of him that refused to let a person die quietly in the dark, enemy or not. Nathan pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her, then lifted her into his arms. She weighed almost nothing, as if the cold had already begun taking pieces of her away. He carried her to his horse and set her across the saddle, holding her steady with one arm while he took the reins with the other. The ride back to his house felt longer than any ride he could remember. The wind screamed past his ears, snow bit at his face, and the whole time he kept glancing down at her, half expecting her to stop breathing before they reached shelter. She did not. She held on barely, the way a candle holds a flame in a room full of drafts. When they finally reached his house, Nathan kicked the door open and carried her straight to the small guest room near the back, the one that had not been used in years. He laid her on the bed and immediately began working, the way he had seen his mother work on frostbitten farmhands when he was young. He wrapped her in blankets, rubbed warmth into her hands, and built up the fire until the room glowed orange. His housekeeper, an older woman named Margaret Doyle, appeared in the doorway with a lantern, took one look at the dress and went pale. "That's an Ashcombe wedding gown," she said quietly. "Nathan, what have you done?" "I found her dying," Nathan said. "That's all I've done." "You know what her family did to yours." "I know. And you brought her here anyway." Nathan did not answer right away. He was staring at the woman's face, at the frost still melting from her eyelashes, at the way her chest rose and fell in short, shallow breaths. Up close, she did not look like the daughter of a family built on cruelty. She looked like someone who had been through something terrible and had not yet had the chance to explain it. "She's someone's daughter," Nathan finally said. "Someone's bride, apparently. Whatever she is to that family, tonight she's just a woman who almost died in the snow. I couldn't leave her there, Margaret. I tried to tell myself I could. I couldn't." Margaret shook her head, but she did not argue further. She had known Nathan since he was a boy, and she recognized the look on his face. It was the same look he had worn the day he pulled a drowning dog out of the river, the same stubborn refusal to let something suffer simply because saving it was inconvenient. Through the night, Nathan barely left the room. He fed the fire every hour, checked her pulse every time it seemed to slow, and pressed warm cloths against her hands and feet the way Margaret instructed him. Somewhere near dawn, the woman's breathing steadied. Her color began to return, faint pink replacing the awful blue that had frightened him so badly on the mountain. She did not wake, not fully, but once, just once, her eyes opened halfway and focused on him. "Please," she whispered, so quiet he almost missed it, "don't let them find me." Then her eyes closed again, and she slipped back into sleep. Nathan sat back in his chair, staring at her, turning those 5 words over and over in his mind. Don't let them find me, not thank you, not who are you, just fear, pure and immediate, aimed at whoever had left her out there to die. He thought about the crest on her dress, about the family that wore it, about the 2 decades of pain that name had caused him and everyone he loved. And yet something about her words did not fit the story he had grown up believing. If her own family had left her out there, then perhaps the Ashcombs he had hated for so long were not simply cruel to outsiders. Perhaps they were cruel to their own as well. Or perhaps something else entirely had happened, something Nathan could not yet imagine. He did not sleep that night. He sat in the chair beside her bed, watching the fire throw shifting light across her face, and for the first time in 20 years, he found himself wondering if the story he had always believed about the Ashcombe family was the whole truth, or only the part that had been told to him. Outside, the storm continued to howl, indifferent to the small, fragile war beginning quietly inside that one warm room. By morning, the wind had died down enough that Nathan could see clearly out the frosted window. The world outside looked peaceful, almost gentle, as if it had not tried to kill someone just hours before. He stood at the window for a long moment, arms crossed, thinking about what he would do when she woke, and what he would say to the men in his household who would surely ask questions the moment they learned who she was. Margaret entered quietly, carrying a tray with warm broth. "She's an Ashcombe," Margaret said again, softer this time, less accusing and more worried. "If anyone finds out you're hiding her here, it could bring trouble to this house. Real trouble, Nathan." "I know," he said. "Then why are you still standing there like a man who's already made up his mind?" Nathan looked at her, then back at the sleeping woman. "Because I have," he said. "Whatever she is, whatever her family did, she didn't choose to be left in that snow. Someone did that to her. And until I know who and why, I'm not sending her back to die twice." Margaret set the tray down without another word, though her expression made clear she thought he was making a mistake he would regret. Maybe he was. Nathan had learned long ago that doing the right thing rarely felt safe in the moment it mattered most. He stayed in that room most of the day, leaving only to handle urgent matters around the house. Each time he returned, he checked on her condition, adjusted the blankets, added wood to the fire. Her breathing grew stronger through the afternoon, her color returned fully, and by evening her eyelids fluttered again, this time staying open a little longer. She looked at him with confusion, then fear, then something like disbelief, as if she could not understand why an enemy's house had become the place she woke up safe. "Where am I?" she asked, her voice raw from the cold. "Somewhere warm," Nathan said carefully. "Somewhere safe for now." Her eyes moved to the fireplace, to the unfamiliar room, and finally back to him. "You're a Cole," she said slowly, recognition dawning in her expression. "I know that name." "And you're an Ashcombe," Nathan replied. "I know that name too." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. 2 names that had meant nothing but conflict for 20 years, sitting quietly in the same room, neither one certain what came next. Finally she spoke again, her voice trembling not from cold this time, but from something closer to grief. "They left me there to die," she whispered. "My own wedding, my own family." Nathan sat forward slightly. "Then maybe," he said quietly, "you and I have more in common than either of us expected." Outside, the storm had passed completely, But something told Nathan that a much larger storm was only just beginning, one that would test everything he thought he understood about loyalty, hatred, and the strange, uncomfortable place where enemies sometimes become the only people willing to help. Her name was Alina Ashcombe, and over the next 3 days, Nathan learned to say it without the old bitterness rising in his throat. She stayed in the back room, hidden from anyone outside the household who might carry word of her survival to the wrong ears. Margaret brought her food and fresh clothing, careful never to ask too many questions, though her eyes always lingered a moment too long, as if she were still deciding whether trust was safe to give. Nathan visited every day, sometimes twice, sitting in the same worn chair beside her bed, watching her grow stronger with each meal, each night of real sleep, each hour further from the snow that had almost taken her. At first, their conversations were short and careful, two people testing the ground beneath old hostility to see if it would hold their weight. "Why were you out there?" Nathan asked one morning, setting a cup of warm tea on the small table beside her bed. Alina wrapped her hands around the cup instead of drinking it right away, as if the warmth alone was something she still needed to remind herself was real. "Because of my wedding," she said, "or what was supposed to be my wedding." "To who?" "Garrick Boone," she said, and something in her voice curled slightly with distaste. "My father arranged it. A business match, he called it. A way to bring peace between two families who had been circling each other for years. I didn't want it, but I didn't have much say in the matter. Daughters rarely do in families like mine." Nathan said nothing, letting her continue at her own pace. "The wedding took place 2 nights ago," Alina said, "in the old chapel near Miller's Ridge. I stood there in that dress, said the words I was told to say, and afterward there was a gathering, drinking, talk. The kind of night where men believe they can say anything as long as the room is loud enough to swallow it." She paused, staring into the tea as if the memory itself had a taste. "I overheard something I wasn't supposed to hear," she said quietly. "Garrick and 2 of his men talking near the stables. They weren't discussing marriage. They were discussing land. My father's land and land beyond that, land that belongs to smaller families throughout this valley. Garrick said the marriage gave him legal standing to claim disputed territory, territory that would ruin dozens of households if it changed hands the way he intended." Nathan's jaw tightened. "Whose land?" "Several families," Alina said. "Including yours, I believe, though I didn't know that at the time. I only knew it was wrong. I went back inside and I must not have hidden my reaction well enough because within an hour, 2 of Garrick's men pulled me aside and told me I would be taking a walk with them. A walk that ended on that mountain in that storm, with them riding away and leaving me there." "They meant for you to die," Nathan said, not as a question. "Yes," Alina said simply. "A wife who knows too much is a problem. A dead wife who knows too much is not." The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. Nathan sat back, absorbing everything she had told him, feeling old anger shift into something new and sharper, something aimed not at the Ashcombe name in general, but at Garrick Boone specifically, and at whatever scheme he had built using Alina's family as a shield. "You could have died protecting information that could ruin the very family you were being forced to marry into," Nathan said slowly. "That's not the kind of thing an enemy does. That's the kind of thing someone does when they still believe in doing right, even when no one is watching." Alina looked up at him, surprised by the observation. "You don't trust my family," she said. "You have every reason not to." "I don't trust Garrick Boone," Nathan corrected. "And after what you've told me, I'm starting to wonder how much of what I believed about your family was even true, or how much of it was shaped by men like him." Alina studied him for a long moment, as if reevaluating everything she had assumed about the Cole family as well. "Your father died in a fire," she said carefully. "Everyone in the valley knows the story. They say it was set by someone connected to my family." Nathan's expression darkened slightly, old grief surfacing briefly before he pushed it back down. "That's what I was always told," he said. "I never saw proof, not really. Just accusations, whispers, and a house burned to the ground with my father inside it. I built my entire understanding of your family around a story I never questioned, because questioning it felt like betraying my father's memory. And now I'm looking at a woman who nearly died, because she refused to stay quiet about wrongdoing. And I'm wondering how many of the old stories in this valley are true, and how many were convenient lies told by people who benefited from us hating each other instead of asking questions." Alina set the tea down, her hands finally steady enough not to need its warmth. "If Garrick learns I survived," she said, "he'll come looking. Not out of love, not even out of anger, out of necessity. I know too much now, and men like him don't leave loose ends alive twice." "Then we don't let him find you," Nathan said. "It's not that simple," Alina said. "My family will be searching too, publicly at least, because appearances matter to them. If I'm found staying in a Cole household, it will look like a scandal, or worse, like betrayal on both sides. Your people will question your judgment. Mine will question my loyalty. Neither side will ask about the truth first." Nathan considered this, running a hand through his hair, feeling the weight of a decision that had already been made the moment he lifted her out of the snow. "Let them question it," he said finally. "I didn't bring you here to win an argument about family honor. I brought you here because you were dying, and I wasn't going to let that happen while I had the ability to stop it. Whatever comes after that is something we deal with when it arrives." Alina looked at him carefully, the wariness in her eyes beginning to soften, just slightly, into something closer to cautious trust. "You're not at all what I expected from a Cole," she said. "And you're not at all what I expected from an Ashcombe," Nathan replied. Over the following days, their conversations deepened. Alina told him about growing up under her father's roof, about the pressure to marry well regardless of her own wishes, about watching her family slowly bend under the influence of men like Garrick Boone, who used old feuds as convenient cover for personal ambition. Nathan told her about his father, about the fire, about the long years of quiet anger he had carried without ever fully understanding its true target. Slowly, without either of them nomming it directly, they began building something neither hatred nor duty had prepared them for: understanding. But peace, however fragile, rarely goes unnoticed for long. On the fourth night, one of Nathan's men, a young farmhand named Peter Lang, arrived at the house breathless, having ridden hard from town. "There's talk," Peter said, catching his breath. "Talk that the Ashcombe bride might still be alive. Someone from Boone's household mentioned it in town, quiet-like, but word travels." Nathan's stomach tightened. "How much time do we have?" "Not much," Peter said. "If Boone hears the same rumor, he'll come looking himself, or send men who won't ask polite questions before searching every house in the valley." Nathan looked toward the back room, where Alina sat by the window, watching the darkening sky with an expression that suggested she had already guessed the conversation happening without her. He walked in and found her standing, stronger now than she had been days before, but still fragile in ways that had nothing to do with her body. "They know," she said quietly before he could speak. "They suspect," Nathan corrected, "which means we still have time to decide what happens next, but not much of it." Alina turned to face him fully. "If Garrick finds me here," she said, "he won't just take me back. He'll make an example of both of us. Your household, my testimony, everything becomes evidence he needs erased." Nathan met her eyes steadily. "Then we make sure he never gets the chance," he said, "whatever it takes." Alina studied him for a long moment, searching his face for any sign of hesitation, and finding none. "You barely know me," she said. "You have no obligation to risk everything for someone your family has spent 20 years hatting." "Maybe not," Nathan admitted, "but I've spent 20 years hatting a story I never fully understood. I'm done letting old lies decide who I protect and who I don't. Outside, clouds gathered again over the mountains, dark and heavy, though this storm carried no snow. It carried something far more dangerous, the slow, inevitable approach of two powerful men who would stop at nothing to silence the truth Alina carried, and the growing certainty in Nathan's mind that protecting her now meant confronting a danger far greater than any mountain storm. The knock came just after midnight, 3 heavy strikes against the front door that made every candle in the house seem to flicker at once. Nathan was already awake, sitting near the fire in the front room, turning over plans in his mind that had no good ending, only better and worse versions of danger. He rose quickly, motioning for Margaret to keep Alina in the back room, out of sight, out of sound if possible. He opened the door to find 2 men standing in the cold, their coats marked with the same crest Nathan had recognized on Alina's torn dress days before. Behind them, horses stamped impatiently in the dark, breath rising in pale clouds. "Evening," the taller of the 2 said, his tone carrying the false politeness of a man who expected obedience rather than conversation. "We're looking for information. A woman went missing during a storm a few nights back. Ashcombe Bride. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you, Cole?" "Should I?" Nathan asked, keeping his voice level. "Given the history between our families," the man said, "we thought it worth asking. Strange things happen in storms. Strange things happen to people who know too much too." The words carried a quiet threat beneath their casual delivery, and Nathan understood immediately that this man worked for Garrick Boone, not for the Ashcombe family directly. His loyalty and his purpose were clear enough without further explanation. "I haven't seen any missing bride," Nathan said. "I've been managing my own affairs since the storm passed. Haven't had reason to travel far." The second man studied Nathan's face carefully, the way a person searches for cracks in a wall they suspect might be hollow. "Mind if we take a look around?" he asked. "Formality, nothing more. Boone's orders. He wants every household checked." Nathan felt his pulse quicken, though he kept his expression carefully unreadable. "My household isn't in the habit of hiding guests from strangers at midnight," Nathan said. "But if Boone insists on formalities, I suppose formalities can be arranged in daylight, with proper notice, like civilized neighbors." The taller man's expression hardened slightly, unused to being refused so plainly, but something in Nathan's steady voice made him hesitate to push further without cause. "We'll be back," he said finally, "with or without notice, if word reaches us that anything strange is happening in this house." "Understood," Nathan said. The men turned and mounted their horses, riding off into the dark without another word. Nathan stood in the doorway until the sound of hooves faded completely, then closed the door and exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his shoulders finally release. Alina appeared in the hallway moments later, her face pale, her hands trembling slightly. "They're getting closer," she said. "They're guessing," Nathan replied. "Guessing isn't proof, but we won't have much time before guessing becomes certainty." "What do we do?" Nathan considered the question carefully before answering, aware that whatever he said next would shape everything that followed. "We stop reacting," he said, "and we start exposing the truth before Boone has the chance to bury it deeper." Over the following days, Nathan and Alina worked quietly, carefully, gathering whatever evidence they could of Garrick Boone's scheme. Alina remembered details from the conversation she had overheard near the stables, specific names of officials Boone had bribed, specific parcels of land he intended to claim through the legitimacy of his marriage to Alina. Nathan reached out cautiously to a handful of trusted neighbors, men whose families had also been threatened by Boone's growing influence, testing carefully whether they might be willing to stand together if the truth came to light. Among them was an older landowner named Peter Whitfield, whose family had farmed the eastern edge of the valley for 3 generations. Whitfield listened carefully as Nathan explained, without nomming Alina directly at first, that a scheme was underway to seize disputed land through manipulated marriage contracts and bribed officials. "If what you're saying is true," Whitfield said slowly, stroking his graying beard, "then Boone isn't just building a fortune. He's building a stranglehold over this entire valley, one family at a time." "That's exactly what he's building," Nathan confirmed. "And you have proof?" "I have testimony," Nathan said, "from someone who heard it directly." Whitfield's eyes narrowed slightly. The Ashcombe bride, the one everyone thought had died in the storm. Nathan hesitated only a moment before nodding. "She's alive," he said, "and she's the only person willing to speak the truth, even though speaking it nearly cost her life." Whitfield sat back, absorbing this information slowly. "That's a dangerous thing to admit to a stranger," he said. "I'm not admitting it to a stranger," Nathan replied. "I'm admitting it to a neighbor who might lose his land the same way others already have, unless someone finds the courage to stop it." Whitfield studied him for a long moment, then finally extended his hand. "Then I suppose," he said, "it's time a few neighbors remembered what standing together actually means." Word spread carefully, quietly, among a small circle of families who had reason to distrust Garrick Boone's rising influence. Each conversation carried risk, each new ally a possible leak that could reach Boone's ears before the truth was ready to be revealed publicly. Nathan moved carefully, weighing every step, aware that one mistake could undo everything he and Alina were building. Meanwhile, Alina grew stronger each day, both physically and in spirit. The fear that had gripped her since waking in Nathan's home slowly transformed into something firmer, something closer to purpose. She spent hours writing down every detail she remembered from the night of her wedding, every name, every fragment of conversation, preparing testimony that could stand firm even under harsh questioning. One evening, as she worked quietly at the small desk in her room, Nathan brought her tea and sat across from her, watching her write with focused determination. "You don't have to do this alone," he said. "I'm not doing it alone," Alina replied, without looking up. "You've risked your household for me already. Whitfield and the others are risking their futures. I owe it to all of you to make sure my testimony is strong enough to matter." "That's not what I meant," Nathan said. "I meant you don't have to carry the weight of proving everything by yourself. We're in this together now, whether either of our families would approve or not." Alina finally looked up, something soft and unguarded crossing her expression before she quickly masked it again. "20 years of hatred between our families," she said, "and somehow the only person willing to protect me is the one man who had every reason not to." "Maybe that's exactly why I could," Nathan said. "I had nothing to prove to your family, and nothing to lose by seeing you as a person instead of a name stitched onto old grudges." The moment lingered between them, quiet and fragile, until the sound of hurried footsteps in the hallway broke the stillness. Margaret appeared, her face tight with worry. "Nathan," she said urgently, "riders approaching, many of them, Boone's colors, and this time they're not stopping at the gate." Nathan rose immediately, instinct sharpening every sense. "How many?" "6, maybe more," Margaret said, moving fast. Alina stood as well, her earlier calm replaced instantly by tension. "They know," she said. "Someone talked." "Or someone guessed correctly," Nathan said, already moving toward the front of the house. "Either way, we don't have time to debate which." He turned to Alina, his voice firm despite the urgency. "Stay here. Whatever happens outside, do not come out unless I come for you myself." "Nathan!" "Please," he said, softer now. "Let me handle this first. Your testimony only matters if you're alive to give it." Alina hesitated, every instinct urging her to argue, but she nodded finally, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Nathan stepped outside just as 6 riders came into view. torches lighting their path through the darkness. Led by a broad-shouldered man Nathan recognized immediately from the wedding announcements that had circulated through the valley weeks earlier. Garrick Boone himself. Boone dismounted slowly, deliberately, his expression calm in a way that felt more dangerous than open hostility. "Nathan Cole," Boone said, his voice smooth and unhurried. "I hear you've been asking questions around the valley. Questions about land disputes, about officials, about matters that don't concern you." "Everything concerning this valley concerns me," Nathan replied evenly. "I live here too." Boone's smile did not reach his eyes. "I also hear," he continued, "that you've developed a sudden interest in my missing bride. Strange, considering the history between our families." "I haven't seen your bride," Nathan said, careful to keep his voice steady. Boone studied him for a long moment, then glanced toward the house behind him. "Then you won't mind if my men take a proper look inside," he said. "Given the seriousness of the situation, I'm sure you understand." "I do mind," Nathan said firmly. "This is my home and you have no authority here." Boone's expression shifted slightly, irritation flickering beneath his controlled exterior. "You're protecting something, Cole," he said. "I can see it in your face. The only question is whether you're protecting it because you believe in something noble or because you simply enjoy defying my family out of old spite." "Believe whatever helps you sleep at night," Nathan said. "But you're not stepping inside my house without proof of wrongdoing, and you have none." For a long, tense moment, neither man moved, the air between them thick with unspoken threat. Boone's men shifted restlessly on their horses, waiting for a signal that never quite came. Finally, Boone stepped back, mounting his horse with deliberate calm. "This isn't finished," he said. "If I learn you've been hiding anything from me, Cole, I promise you'll regret the day you decided loyalty to a dead feud mattered more than your own safety." "Careful," Nathan said quietly. "Threats tend to sound a lot like confessions when spoken by men with something to hide." Boone's jaw tightened, but he said nothing further. He turned his horse and rode off into the darkness, his men following closely behind, leaving Nathan standing alone in the cold, heart pounding, aware that the confrontation had bought them time, not safety. He returned inside to find Alina waiting anxiously near the fire, relief flooding her expression the moment she saw him unharmed. "He knows," she said quietly. "He suspects," Nathan corrected. "But suspicion won't hold up if we finish gathering proof before he decides suspicion is enough reason to act without it." Alina nodded, steadying herself. "Then we need to move faster," she said, "before he finds another way to reach me." Nathan looked at her, seeing not fear this time but resolve, sharp and unwavering. "Together," he said. "Together," she agreed. Outside, the night remained calm on the surface, but both of them understood clearly now that calm was only a temporary illusion. Somewhere beyond the mountains, Garrick Boone was already planning his next move, and the small circle of allies Nathan had gathered would need to be ready to act the moment danger arrived again, this time with far less warning than before. 3 days after Boone's visit, an old man named Silas Rourke arrived at Nathan's door, carrying a leather satchel filled with papers that smelled of dust and time. Silas had once served as a clerk in the valley's small courthouse, decades earlier, before retiring to a quiet farm near the river. Nathan had sought him out on Whitfield's recommendation, hoping the old man might remember something useful about the region's oldest laws, laws written long before Boone or Ashcombe families had ever set foot in the valley. "You said you needed something about mountain law," Silas said, settling into a chair by the fire. "Old protections, things most folks have forgotten because they've never needed them." "That's right," Nathan said. "Anything involving marriage, protection, or claims of guardianship." Silas rummaged through his satchel, pulling out a yellowed page covered in faded handwriting. "There's one," he said slowly, That hasn't been used in my lifetime, or my father's for that matter. It comes from the earliest settlers, back when winters here killed more people than any feud ever did. He read carefully, tracing the words with one finger. Any man who saves a bride from death by exposure, before her marriage is legally completed through consummation and formal registry, may claim protector's right over her, provided he offers marriage himself within a set number of days. The claim supersedes prior arrangements if the original union was not properly finalized. Nathan sat forward, his heart quickening. "Alina's wedding," he said. "It happened, but nothing after. She was taken from the gathering before the marriage could be finalized under law." Silas nodded slowly. "If that's true, then this old protection still applies. It was meant for situations exactly like hers, women found dying in storms before their marriages were fully sealed. It gave whoever saved them a legal claim stronger than any earlier arrangement." Alina, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, stepped forward, her expression a mixture of disbelief and cautious hope. "You're saying," she said, "that under this old law, Nathan could claim protector's right over me, and it would override my marriage to Garrick Boone." "If the marriage truly wasn't finalized," Silas said, "yes. It's rarely used because most people simply choose to marry through the front door, not because it isn't valid anymore. Old laws don't expire just because people stop remembering them." Nathan looked at Alina, understanding immediately the enormity of what this meant and the risk it carried. "If I claim protector's right," he said slowly, "it would need to be declared publicly, in front of witnesses from both families, for it to hold any legal weight." "That's correct," Silas confirmed. "A private claim means nothing. It has to be spoken aloud before witnesses willing to testify it was made, and it has to happen before Boone finds another way to reassert his own claim." Alina's hands trembled slightly, though her voice remained steady. "If we do this publicly, Boone will know immediately that I'm alive and exactly where I've been." "He already suspects both," Nathan said. "The only thing we control now is whether he learns the truth on his terms or ours." Alina studied him carefully. "This isn't a small thing you're offering," she said. "A public claim like this ties your name to mine permanently, regardless of what happens between our families afterward." "I'm aware," Nathan said. "You'd be doing this," she continued, "not out of love, not out of any real courtship, but out of necessity, to protect me from a man who already tried to kill me once." Nathan met her eyes steadily. "I'd be doing this," he said, "because it's the only way to keep you alive long enough to expose what Boone has done, and because somewhere between that snowstorm and tonight, protecting you stopped feeling like an obligation and started feeling like something I actually choose, every single day." Alina said nothing for a long moment, the weight of his words settling gently between them. "Then let's do the unthinkable," she said finally, "and give Garrick Boone a fight he never expected." Word was sent quietly to Whitfield and the small circle of allied families, informing them of the plan and requesting their presence at a public gathering held at the Valley's central meeting hall, a place typically reserved for trade disputes and community announcements. Nathan also sent formal notice to the Ashcombe family directly, informing them that their daughter was alive, safe, and would be present at the gathering to address matters concerning her marriage and its aftermath. The notice reached Garrick Boone as well, exactly as Nathan intended. On the evening of the gathering, the meeting hall filled quickly, word having spread through the valley faster than anyone anticipated. Families who had lived quietly under the shadow of old feuds for decades came to witness whatever confrontation was about to unfold, some out of curiosity, others because they too had reason to fear Boone's growing influence. Alina's father arrived early, his expression unreadable, flanked by two of his own men. He said little, though his eyes lingered on his daughter with an expression that seemed caught between relief and confusion. Garrick Boone arrived last, exactly as Nathan expected, entering the hall with the same calm arrogance he had displayed outside Nathan's home days earlier. "This is quite a gathering," Boone said, his voice carrying easily across the room. "All for a bride who supposedly died in a storm, yet somehow stands before us very much alive." "She's alive," Nathan said, stepping forward, "because your men left her to die, and I chose not to let that happen." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Boone's expression tightened slightly, though he kept his composure. "A serious accusation," he said, "with no proof behind it." "There's proof," Alina said, stepping forward beside Nathan, her voice steady despite the weight of every eye in the room. "I heard you and your men discussing plans to seize land throughout this valley, using our marriage as legal cover. When you realized I knew, you had me taken from the gathering and left in the storm, expecting the cold to finish what you didn't want to do yourself." Boone's jaw tightened. "Careful," he said quietly. "Accusations like that can ruin reputations quickly, including your own." "My reputation isn't the one in danger here," Alina replied. "Nathan Cole found me dying in the snow and saved my life. Under old mountain law, since our marriage was never properly finalized before I was taken from that gathering, he holds protectors right over me, a claim stronger than any arrangement made between our families." The room erupted into murmurs, several older residents nodding slowly, recognizing the old law even if younger generations had never heard of it before. Boone's composure finally cracked, anger flashing briefly across his face before he forced it back into careful neutrality. "This is absurd," he said. "An old superstition dressed up as law, invoked conveniently by a man who's clearly grown attached to something that isn't his to claim." "It's not superstition," Silas Rourke said, stepping forward from the crowd, holding up the old document for the room to see. "It's written clearly in the valley's founding records, still valid, still binding. Any man who saves a bride from death by exposure before her marriage is legally completed may claim protectors right over her." The room fell silent, every eye moving between Boone, Nathan, and Alina, waiting to see how this unprecedented moment would resolve. "Nathan Cole," Alina said clearly, turning to face him directly, her voice carrying across the hushed hall, "I accept your protection, and I choose to stand beside you, not because old law demands it, but because you're the only person who has ever chosen my safety over convenience." Nathan felt something steady and certain settle into his chest as he responded. "I claim protectors right over Alina Ashcombe," he said clearly, "under the law recorded and witnessed here tonight, and I do so willingly, without regret." Boone stood rigid, fury barely concealed beneath his controlled exterior, aware that the room's mood had shifted decisively against him. "This changes nothing about the land agreements already in motion," he said finally, though his voice lacked its earlier confidence. "It changes everything," Whitfield said, stepping forward from the crowd. "Because now we have a witness willing to speak publicly about exactly how those agreements were secured, and enough families here tonight willing to demand a full investigation before another acre changes hands." Boone looked around the hall, realizing slowly that the support he once assumed was unshakable had quietly eroded while he focused elsewhere. Several families who had once remained silent out of fear now stood visibly aligned with Whitfield, Nathan, and Alina. Without another word, Boone turned and left the hall, his composure finally abandoned, his men following uncertainly behind him. Alina's father approached slowly afterward, studying his daughter with an expression far softer than Nathan expected. "I didn't know," he said quietly, "about the land, about what Boone intended. I believed I was securing peace for our family, not danger for yours." "I believe you," Alina said, "but belief doesn't undo what almost happened." Her father nodded, guilt evident in his expression. "No," he said, "it doesn't, but perhaps it can help prevent whatever Boone intends to do next." Nathan watched the exchange carefully, aware that this fragile alliance between former enemies remained far from settled, and that Boone, wounded and exposed, was unlikely to simply disappear quietly into failure. Somewhere beyond the mountains, in whatever shadowed room Boone retreated to that night, Nathan suspected new plans were already forming, plans built from anger and desperation rather than patience and strategy. The unthinkable claim had been made. The truth had finally been spoken aloud, in front of witnesses who could no longer pretend not to have heard it. But peace, Nathan understood clearly, was rarely won in a single evening. It had to be defended, again and again, until the danger threatening it finally ran out of room to hide. The days following the gathering brought a strange, uneasy quiet to the valley, the kind of silence that follows a storm everyone knows has not truly finished passing. Garrick Boone did not return to Nathan's house, nor did he send men to threaten or intimidate as he had before. Instead, he retreated entirely, holing up in his own estate on the far side of the valley, and for a while it seemed as though the confrontation at the meeting hall had been enough to end things quietly. Nathan knew better than to trust that silence completely. He spent those days working alongside Whitfield and the other allied families, formally documenting the land agreements Boone had secured through bribery and manipulation. Alina worked tirelessly beside them, providing detailed testimony, cross-referencing dates and names with records Sela's work helped uncover from the old courthouse archives. Slowly, a clear picture emerged, one that showed exactly how Boone had used fear, false promises, and corrupted officials to expand his influence across dozens of smaller properties throughout the region. "This is enough," Whitfield said one evening, reviewing the final collection of documents spread across Nathan's table. "Enough to bring this before the regional magistrate, enough to undo every fraudulent claim Boone has made in the past 3 years." "It's enough to convict him," Nathan said, "but only if the magistrate agrees to hear it before Boone finds a way to silence it first." Alina, seated nearby, looked up from the papers she had been organizing. "He's not going to simply let this happen," she said. "Men like Garrick don't retreat quietly once they've been publicly humiliated. He's planning something. I can feel it." Her instincts proved correct sooner than any of them expected. 3 nights later, a fire broke out at Whitfield's grain storehouse, destroying nearly half the season's harvest before neighbors managed to control the flames. No one saw who started it, but everyone understood exactly what message it carried. Nathan arrived at Whitfield's property the following morning to find the older man standing amid the charred wreckage, jaw set with quiet fury rather than despair. "This was Boone," Whitfield said. "No proof, of course. He's too careful for that, but I know exactly what this is." "A warning," Nathan said. "A warning that he still believes fear is more powerful than truth," Whitfield replied. "We need to move quickly before he decides warnings aren't enough anymore." Nathan returned home that afternoon to find Alina waiting anxiously, having already heard news of the fire from Margaret. "This is because of us," she said, "because of what we exposed." "This is because of Boone," Nathan corrected gently, "because he'd rather destroy everything around him than admit what he's done." "Then we need to finish this," Alina said firmly, "before he burns down more than just a storehouse." Together, they compiled the final testimony and documentation, preparing for an urgent meeting with the regional magistrate, a stern, fair-minded woman named Colleen Marsh, known throughout the valley for her insistence on evidence over reputation. Nathan sent word requesting an immediate hearing, citing not only the land fraud, but also the recent fire as clear evidence of intimidation against witnesses. The hearing was scheduled for the following week, held in the regional courthouse 2 days' ride from the valley. Nathan, Alina, Whitfield, and several other affected families traveled together, understanding fully that this journey carried real risk, especially with Boone growing more desperate by the day. The night before the hearing, as they rested at a small inn along the route, Alina found Nathan sitting alone near the stable, staring up at a sky far calmer than the one that had first brought them together. "You've been quiet," she said, sitting beside him. "Just thinking," Nathan said, "about how strange all of this is. A few weeks ago, I would have said the Ashcombe name meant nothing but grief to me. Now, I can't imagine facing any of this without you standing beside me." Alina smiled faintly, though worry still lingered beneath it. "And if tomorrow doesn't go as we hope, if Boone finds a way to twist the truth even now?" "Then we keep fighting," Nathan said simply. "Because giving up was never really an option, not since the night I found you in that snow." Alina looked at him carefully. Then, without a fully formed plan, she covered his hand with hers. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said quietly, "I'm grateful it was you who found me and no one else." Nathan turned his hand to hold hers properly, the simple gesture carrying more certainty than either of them had expected to feel after everything they had endured. "So am I," he said. The following morning, the courthouse filled with representatives from families throughout the valley, all eager to witness the outcome of a case that had already reshaped the balance of power in their region. Garrick Boone arrived with his own legal representation, composed and confident despite the weight of evidence stacked against him. Magistrate Marsh reviewed the documents carefully, questioning Alina directly about the night of her wedding, questioning Whitfield about the recent fire, questioning several officials whose names appeared repeatedly throughout Boone's fraudulent land transfers. Boone's lawyer attempted several times to discredit Alina's testimony, suggesting she had fabricated the entire account out of personal resentment toward her arranged marriage. "If this were fabrication," Magistrate Marsh said sharply, cutting off the lawyer's argument, "I doubt Miss Ashcombe would have nearly died in a storm to protect a lie, nor would half a dozen additional families here today have independently uncovered evidence supporting her account." The hearing stretched across most of the day, evidence building steadily against Boone, until even his own legal counsel seemed to lose confidence in the arguments they presented. By late afternoon, Magistrate Marsh delivered her ruling clearly and without hesitation. Garrick Boone's land claims, secured through fraudulent means and bribery of regional officials, are hereby invalidated, she announced. Furthermore, given clear evidence of intimidation against witnesses, including the destruction of property belonging to Peter Whitfield, formal charges will be filed against Garrick Boone, pending further investigation. The courthouse erupted into quiet murmurs of relief and disbelief among the gathered families, years of quiet fear finally beginning to lift from shoulders that had carried it far too long. Boone sat rigid throughout the ruling, his earlier confidence completely drained, replaced by the hollow realization that his carefully built empire had crumbled in the span of a single afternoon. As the hearing concluded, and families slowly began departing the courthouse, Alina's father approached Nathan and Alina together, his expression heavy with an emotion that looked remarkably like regret finally allowed to surface. "I owe you both an apology," he said. "I built my daughter's future around an arrangement I believed would protect our family, and instead nearly cost her life. I don't expect either of you to forgive that easily." "Forgiveness isn't something that happens all at once," Alina said honestly. "But it's something we can work toward, especially now that the truth is finally out in the open." Her father nodded slowly, then extended a hand toward Nathan, an unprecedented gesture between two families who had spent decades avoiding even casual acknowledgement of one another. "Cole," he said, "whatever history exists between our families, I owe you a debt I don't know how to properly repay. You saved my daughter's life, and in doing so, you may have saved this entire valley from years of continued exploitation." Nathan accepted the handshake firmly. "Then let's make sure the next 20 years look nothing like the last 20, he said, starting today." The ride home felt different than the journey out had been, lighter somehow, despite the exhaustion of everything they had endured. Alina rode beside Nathan, watching the familiar mountains rise into view, the very same peaks that had once nearly claimed her life now looking simply like home. "You know," she said, breaking the comfortable silence between them, "when you first found me in that snow, I never imagined it would lead to any of this." "Neither did I," Nathan admitted. "I thought I was simply refusing to let someone die needlessly. I didn't expect it to change everything I believed about loyalty or family or where real danger actually comes from." "And now?" Alina asked. "Now," Nathan said, glancing over at her with quiet certainty, "I think the only thing worth protecting was never really about old feuds or family names. It's about choosing to do what's right, even when everyone around you insists it's foolish." Alina smiled, reaching over to take his hand once more as their horses continued steadily toward home. Behind them, the valley slowly began healing from decades of quiet fear, families who had once distrusted one another now standing united against corruption that had nearly gone unnoticed for far too long. Ahead of them lay an uncertain future, one neither Nathan nor Alina could fully predict, built not on old hatred, but on the unlikely bond formed the night an enemy's bride was left to freeze, and one man chose, against every expectation, to do the unthinkable. Their story, born from ice and old grudges, was only just beginning.